Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the Retro Wrestling Room. Growing up in the mid-90s, there were two things that every kid could not avoid. One, pro wrestling, and two, video games. There were two camps of kids when I was in high school, the kids who had the PlayStation and the ones who had the N64. Nobody I ever knew could ever dream of having them both, so you had to be wise with your decision. The PlayStation had games like Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil, and the N64 had Super Mario 64, GoldenEye, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. It was really hard to decide. And then I saw the price of the games on the shelves. The PS1 games were between £30 and £40, and the N64 the games were between £50 and £60. There was a no-brainer.
Well, duh.
More great games for cheaper? Win-win. So the PlayStation was what we got. In the late 90s, wrestling was having its biggest boom in 10 years. Everyone had Austin or NWO shirts. Kids were throwing up Wolfpack signs to each other and giving the teachers the DX suck it gesture. It was truly a great time to be a kid and a wrestling fan. I had already had wrestling games before, like the Acclaim trilogy of games on the Mega Drive, and I spent countless amounts of money in the arcade whenever I went on Pontin's holidays, on the WWF Superstars and WrestleFest machines. But these games were going to be on new consoles. No more 2D sprites, these were going to be fully 3D games. We were promised the world. I had loads of wrestling games for the system as a kid, and I can't ever remember not having fun. But was I blinded? Looking across the internet in this day, the games on the N64 are still heralded as classics. No Mercy is treated like the godfather of wrestling games, whereas my beloved PS1 games are spit upon from their greatest heights. Could I really be that wrong? Well, this is the idea for where this video came from. Were these games really all that bad? Are there any secret gems that I missed? Obviously I could go on and on about every feature in every game, but we would be here for months. So this is my roughly 5 to 10 minute review for every wrestling game that I could find for the original PlayStation. We've got games by the WWF, WCW, ECW, All Japan, New Japan, games based around TV shows and more. And the games range from 1995 to 2003. So in this setup video, let's look at the landscape of the wrestling world at the time at the start of the lifespan of the original PlayStation. Then, when we've reviewed all the games in the list, we'll take another look at the wrestling landscape to see how it had changed at the end of the PlayStation 1's lifespan. All Japan Pro Wrestling. Arguably the best promotion in regards to in-ring competition at the time. In 1995, Dave Meltzer gave out 12 5-star match ratings, and half of those went to matches held within AJPW. Mitsuharu Misawa, Kenta Kobashi, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Teo were known as the 4 pillars of pro wrestling, and they were all firing on all cylinders. It was Kawada who came into the year as the Triple Crown Heavyweight Champion, but dropped the belt after being blasted by Stan Hansen's left arm lariat on the 4th of March. He kept hold of the belt for 2 months but couldn't hold off Misawa. As Hansen goes for his patented lariat that saw him win the title, Misawa rolls him up and keeps him down for the 1-2-3. New Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan Pro Wrestling is so far ahead of every other Japanese promotion these days that it's now hard to remember that it wasn't always the case. Hashimoto came into the year as the IWGP champion, having won it the previous year at Wrestling Dontaku against Tatsumi Fujinami. He then held it all the way to May of 1995, again at Wrestling Dontaku, where he bested by the Great Muta Kenji Muto. They may not have been the biggest promotion at the time, but they sure did put on the biggest show of 1995. New Japan Pro Wrestling joined with WCW and put on a joint 2-show promotion in Pyongyang, North Korea titled Collision in Korea. The shows drew an insane number of over 350,000 people over the 2 shows. Extreme Championship Wrestling. 1994 was the year when Eastern Championship Wrestling finally went extreme. The changing of that first word had a major effect on the entire wrestling landscape that can still be felt today. The main ECW champion of 1995 was none other than the first person many people think of when they picture ECW, the Sandman. He was able to defeat the man who started the entire shift in culture, Shane Douglas. Known for his mesmerising entrance, where he would come down to the tune of Enter Sandman by Metallica while drinking from a can and smoking a cigarette, really set not only the tone for the Sandman, but for the entire company, and it set them apart from everybody else. World Championship Wrestling. WCW was in a bit of a transitioning phase in 1995, as they were not hitting on all cylinders in the ring like they had been in the late 80s and the early 90s, and they hadn't quite got up to the level where they were dangerous competitors to the WWF with the likes of the NWO and Goldberg in the following years. This was red and yellow Hulk Hogan running wild, but in the opposite company. There was times where he was going head to head with the Dungeon of Doom, the pure cringe, over-the-top heel stable led by the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, and his group of Saturday morning cartoon villains. The Dungeon of Doom finally got one over on the Hulkster when the Giant, who at the time was billed as the son of Andre the Giant, managed to dethrone the Hulkster at Halloween Havoc. World Wrestling Federation. 1995 was not a stellar year for the Fed. Long gone were the dizzying heights of the 1980s and the early 90s, they were slap bang in the new generation era. The main champion who held on to the belt for the majority of the year was Big Daddy Cool Diesel. Notable feuds from that year included Big Sid, Davey Boy Smith and King Mabel. Not really a stellar main event scene, but that is where we were at the time. You have to admit though that his title match against Bret Hart at Survivor Series 95 was an absolutely stellar match that really showed that Diesel could deliver in a main event scene with the right partner, but he lost the title that night and he never regained it. The secondary title fared slightly better however, as it was held for the majority of the year between Jeff Jarrett, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels, with the star moment coming at SummerSlam in the famous rematch ladder match that is still seen as a top 10 match held at a SummerSlam event. At the end of every review, I'm going to try and rank all of the games on tier list, and then at the end of the series we should have a complete list of 30 games all in order and in the correct order according to me. I've narrowed them down to 5 sections to keep it simple. Top tier. This is for what I can call the best wrestling games of all time. To get into this tier, we really need the games to match up next to the likes of Here Come the Pain for PS2 and No Mercy on the N64. The second tier. This is titled Great Wrestling Games. The titles may not quite reach the lofty heights of the best games ever, but they are still great games that have stood the test of time. Then the third tier. Average wrestling games. Nothing's necessarily wrong with any of these games. You may even have a good time when playing them, but there are much better options out there to play. The fourth tier, avoid these games. The games in this section will be under average games. They were either not very great when they were released, poor graphics, shoddy mechanics or something along those lines. They won't have many redeeming qualities, but they are not the worst of the worst. That is saved for the bottom tier. Worst wrestling games ever. The worst of the worst. They would still be considered this if they were released at any time, and they are not just bad wrestling games, but awful games in general. I'm guessing if you looked at the full list, you could probably already guess where some of these games may end up, but you may be surprised by some. So that's the plan, I guess, to look at every wrestling game on the original PlayStation. If you like the sound of this series, please leave a comment below and let me know which games you love or hate for this system. And make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the videos in the series. So, It's a bye from me, and hopefully we will see you again soon.